In 1972, it has been 20 years since Canada last won the Olympic gold in hockey, and Canada's excuse was we weren't allowed to use our best players because they are professional. If we ever did, we would win easily against the Soviet Union. So, now is our chance to prove we are still the best country in hockey. 8 games, future Hall of Famers on both teams, politics, and a goal that excited a nation. Today we're going to look at the 72 Summit Series and answer the big question: how is the Summit Series still historically significant in Canadian history? It's hockey, and hockey is our game. The 72 Summit Series was an exhibition series between the Soviet Union and Canada, with 4 games in Canada and 4 games in the Soviet Union, held in September of 1972. Players that played for Canada include Brad Park, Phil Esposito, Bobby Clarke, and Stan Mikita. On the Russian side, players included Alexander Yurashev, Vladimir Karmalikov, and Vladislav Trekiak. All of the players mentioned are members of the Hockey Hall of Fame. The Summit Series was historically significant in a few ways. The Summit Series took place during the height of the Cold War, with tensions between the Soviet Union and Canada representing the broader political and heated rivalry between the East and West. The Summit Series was a symbolic battle between the two hockey superpowers, showcasing the differing styles of play and their governing systems. Next was the anticipation of the level of competition this series would contain. The Summit Series was the first ever meeting between the Soviet Union and Canada's professional hockey players in an international ice hockey tournament. The unbelievable Soviet skill level and style of play surprised Canadian players and fans, leading to an intense and closely contested series. The Canadian players believed in the hype and came into camp out of shape and expected they were going to play senior A-level players. Bob Davidson said that Hall of Fame goalie Trekiak couldn't stop a beach ball. Too bad he scouted him after he just got married and led in 11 goals. The series were played in the NHL preseason, and in 1972, players showed up to camp out of shape and used the camp to get in shape, unlike the NHL players of today. Canada was surprised at how hard-fought, physical, and fast-paced of the games. The games showcased high-level skill from both sides, captivating audiences around the world. Canada had to rally and make a comeback. The Summit Series is remembered for Canada's dramatic comeback after falling behind in this series. Trailing 1-3-1 after 5 games in the series, with the first 4 games played in Canada, Canadian people were devastated by the possibility of losing to the hated communist country. By that time, most Canadians believed the propaganda that Russia was a godless country and Canada is the best in hockey. How could our players let this happen? However, they were able to rally. They won the final 3 games on enemy Soviet Union soil, securing the 4-3-1 series victory. The comeback showcased the toughness, resilience, and determination of the Canadian team. They made a historic event legendary. The purpose of the Summit Series was to settle the argument who holds hockey supremacy. Canada was and is still considered the birthplace of ice hockey. Canada saw the growing success of the Soviet Union as a challenge to their long-standing hockey dominance. The Canadian team wanted to reassert their supremacy and demonstrate that they are the best hockey players in North America. A consequence was the impact that the Summit Series had on international hockey. The Summit Series highlighted the small gap between amateur and professional players. It eventually led to the inclusion of professional players in international tournaments, such as the Olympics and the World Cup. This fundamentally changed the landscape of international ice hockey. Next is applying historical perspectives to the Summit Series. Nationalism and national identity played a significant role in the Summit Series. Analyzing the events from this perspective reveals how this series became a source of national pride and reflection of the cultural values and traditions of Canada and the Soviet Union. After the series, Canadians realized that Russians have great players and should be admired. The Soviet team's disciplined, swift, and highly skilled approach challenged the physical, aggressive style that was dominant in the NHL. The Canadians made a miraculous comeback. The way the tournament was organized put Canada in a disadvantage. It was played before the NHL season when players were out of shape. The schedule of the first 4 games in Canada and then the last 4 games in the Soviet Union was also a disadvantage. The Canadians' pride and strength came out in the end, and they were able to win, but just barely. After the series, the world knew that Canada was still the dominant hockey power, but the Soviets weren't far behind. The series affected fundamentally the way hockey is played in the future. The NHL game played today is so much different than it was in 1972. It is a much more skilled game and has made the game better. A rivalry was created, and the two countries have played many great games since then. Therefore, the 1972 Summit Series was an historic event in hockey and Canadian history. The continuity, change, perspective, significance, cause, and consequence of this series help make this series legendary. The series is still talked about today, and one of the reasons is because of the game-winning goals by Paul Henderson in Games 6, 7, and 8. The 72 Summit Series is a Canadian heritage moment, and Paul Henderson, along with all the other Canadian players, are Canadian heroes. Thanks for listening to this Canadian heritage moment. Let's end this with listening to Foster Hewitt's amazing call of the winning goals in the last game to secure the win for Canada. It is known as the goal of the century.